Okay, well, thanks for having me here, Erin and Nikki. So I'm here to talk about the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant opportunity from Mass Humanities. These are grants for up to $20,000 for projects that expand Massachusetts stories or understanding of this of the place where we all live and its people. And the letter of inquiries deadline for this grant opportunity is April 11th. So we're accepting letters of inquiry up until that point, and after that, we'll review those and give feedback to potential applicants. If the project is eligible, we'll open up that full application for you and then do additional support webinars at that stage. So I'm here just to give everybody a little bit more information about that grant line. There's lots on our website, but I think sometimes talking through an opportunity, giving some examples can be really helpful for either seeing how an idea might align with something you're already thinking of doing, or sparking new ideas that would be useful and of interest to you and your community. So I made a PowerPoint, and I will share that right now, and we'll walk through it, and then we'll have a conversation with Erin and Nikki. They might ask questions as kind of representatives of the Worcester cultural community. So it's going to take me a second to bring the PowerPoint up and share my screen. So let's see. Okay. From the beginning. All right. So as I said, I'm here to talk about the Expand Massachusetts Stories grants. I'm Katherine Stevens. I direct the grants program at Mass Humanities. We're the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. You might be familiar with the National Endowment for the Arts. The NEH is the peer organization focused on the humanities. And as a state affiliate, we create opportunities for the people of Massachusetts to improve their lives and build a more equitable Commonwealth through the humanities. We receive our major support from the NEH and the Mass Cultural Council, and one of the ways we make our impacts is through grants. And that's what I'm here to talk about today, our grant making program. So one of the focuses of our grant making program is the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant. So I'm going to provide an overview of that grant opportunity. I want to talk about 3 sample projects, again, to maybe spark ideas, or maybe you'll see the kind of work that you do in those sample projects. And then I'll talk about a specific opportunity we have for projects led by people from historically excluded communities, and that's the Advancing Equity track of this grant line. Then I'll open up for some questions. So Expand Massachusetts Stories grants support projects that collect, interpret, or share stories about Massachusetts, its people, its communities, and its places. We're particularly interested in projects focused on voices and experiences that have gone unrecognized or have been excluded from public conversation. I'm really delighted to be talking to the Worcester cultural community because the Worcester cultural community does this work and has been doing it for decades. In particular, think of Worcester Historical Museum, whose photo is to the left on this slide here, who did a fabulous exhibit in 2019 called For the Record LGBTQ+ Worcester, which I'll mention a little bit more when I talk about those project examples. So before I get into some of the nitty-gritty of the grant, I just kind of wanted to put forward 2 big questions that everybody can think about while I talk about cash matching and deadlines. But those questions are, what about Worcester? Its people, its communities, its places. Do people not know? What are the stories that aren't recognized, that haven't been lifted up, and that aren't part of what people think of when they think of Worcester, but should be. And then on the other side, what about Worcester, people, communities, and places, its past and its present? Do you want to understand better? What do you need to know? What does your community need to know about itself, about its neighbors, in order to be, full and active residents of your city, and to make the complex decisions that city residents always make? Those are just 2 big questions to keep in mind, and perhaps to spark ideas with projects that you might be doing or might want to do. So details about the grant deadline, the grant opportunity. As I said, we're accepting letters of inquiry now. That's an initial stage in the grant process where you just tell us the basics of your project. As I said, grants are up to $20,000. One thing to note is that there is a 10% cash match that your organization would need to provide. So if you request $20,000 from Mass Humanities, you would need to be bringing your own 10% of that to the project. So if it was $20,000 request, that would be $2,000, but you can request less than $20,000 as well. The rest of a match could all be in volunteered services, time, and the like. That deadline for the letter of inquiries, as I said, is April 11th. After that, we will review those letters of inquiry, provide feedback, and open applications for the full application after that April 11th deadline. And those applications will be due July 11th. We're making awards in September. All nonprofit state or municipal government organizations, state or federally recognized tribes that serve Massachusetts residents are eligible to apply. So nonprofits, against state or municipal government organizations, state or federally recognized tribes, as you're serving Massachusetts residents, you're welcome to apply. And we also welcome applications from fiscally sponsored projects. If you have questions about eligibility and these kinds of things, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is on the slide there. Some additional details about the projects themselves, what the requirements for the projects are. So projects should use the tools of the humanities. So we consider those to be inquiry, contextualization, and reflection on all manner of human thought, experience, and relationships to improve our shared understanding of Massachusetts and its peoples. As I said, awards will be made in September, and so that means that funds for these projects can be used for project costs that happen after that September date. Typically, projects use those funds for between 8 and 16 months, and at the end of that time period, have a project outcome that they report on. Projects also have advisors who are experts in humanities subjects and methods that are relevant to the project goals. And that's something I'm always happy to talk about, provide some examples of. Finally, projects need to have a publicly accessible outcome. So there's something that the project creates or produces that the public can see for free or at minimal cost. You'll find more information. That's the basic. You'll find more information about the grant line on our website. So if you go to masshumanities.org and you click on this grants area up here, it'll open up a page with an overview of our grants program. And if you scroll down, you'll come to these tiles that are sort of summaries of each of the grant opportunities that we have. And you'll see grant guidelines, sometimes an FAQ, previews of the forms. We have all of the grant applications, grant guideline materials in Spanish as well. And you'll see this a blue Apply Now button, and that will link you to the online grant system, which is where we accept all of those letters of inquiry and all of those applications. As I said, I wanted to talk about 3 sample projects. I think it can help spark ideas. It can help you perhaps see yourself in this grant opportunity. And it also gives me an opportunity to do my favorite thing, which is talk about amazing public humanities projects. And I wanted to start with a true favorite of mine, which was the Worcester Historical Museum's For the Record project. So this was a project that was that Mass Humanities funded, and it took place in 2019. So the Worcester Historical Museum said, we have a small archive, a small number of documents of LGBTQ history in Worcester, but it's not nearly enough. It doesn't fully represent this community. And so they undertook a project to collect oral histories, to collect documents in partnership with LGBT communities, people and organizations. We also did document collection days, and then a series of public programs on LGBTQ history, culture, contemporary questions, youth intergenerational conversations, and it all culminated in an exhibit. So that was a big, an extensive project undertaken by, a cultural and historical organization. And it was really about surfacing and sharing a community story that hadn't fully been represented in a place like the Worcester Historical Museum. But I also want to share the next image, which is a project that was undertaken not by not by a history museum, but by a community organization. So Mass Humanities also funds these projects for community organizations, the communities that themselves want to reflect on their history. And so this was a project by the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Boston, which is a really interesting and important community organization that was founded in the 1980s by interracial, intergenerational, cross-class coalition of neighbors who had seen their neighborhood in the Dudley Street area be divested from and undergo a great deal of, as much of Boston did, conflict and strife, but neighbors decided to come together and form a community land trust and a community development organization so that they could have a say in the way that their community developed, and in the way that their community developed that could preserve the cultures of the many communities that lived there at that time. So this was a community that said, we recognize we have this important history in this city, and we want to record first the stories of that community that came together in the early 1980s to form the land trust, and importantly have the younger generation, so youth, record those stories. So in many cases, this was someone in their teens or 20s recording the stories of a parent or a grandparent or an elder in the community. So they recorded those stories. They then transcribed and also translated, because the stories were in multiple languages, and then preserved them through a partnership with the UMass Boston's archives, and then held a series of community conversations about the experience and what they learned about themselves, about their place in both the community and its history in Boston and in Massachusetts. And so it was a really wonderful project where community was able to see its own story, right, and then share that story more broadly. The last project I just want to highlight is a recently funded Expand Massachusetts Stories grant project by Nueva Esperanza and Holyoke. It's called the El Corazon Heart of Holyoke project, and it built off I believe it was a New England Foundation for the Arts grant to create murals in downtown area of Holyoke. And those murals by artists, represent a lot of the history and traditions and cultures of the Puerto Rican and Latinx communities in Holyoke. And so this tour series engages people with the existing art, with the stories that they tell, and with the history and culture of that community. And so the tours also partner with Wistaria Hearst Museum, which has created its own mobile tour that they can bring to different sites, and the city's Office of Cultural and Economic Development, because they see this as a way of bringing people into the city so they can see the culture and the history and the heritage that is there. So that's just 3 potential projects. There are lots of different ways one could create a project for this grant line, but I thought these might be good projects to share, since they both highlight amazing things that have happened in Worcester, how the stories grants can uplift narratives and experiences in communities, and also connect with the arts and arts activities in the cities. So I want to shift now to talking about the Advancing Equity track in the Expand Massachusetts Stories grants. So Mass Humanities, one of our goals is to be part of transforming the leadership of the public humanities field so that it reflects the backgrounds, aspirations, and the diversity of the communities in our state. With this grant line, we're going to do that through the Advancing Equity track. So Expand Massachusetts Stories applicants whose projects are led by people from historically excluded communities and whose organizations meet additional criteria will have the opportunity to be part of the Advancing Equity track in the grant line. So Mass Humanities will select up to 15 Advancing Equity track eligible applicants who want to participate in this process. And those participating applicants will then work with the Mass Humanities program officer, a humanities expert that will provide to support the application development process, and then result in a final application that can be recommended for funding approval. Just a little bit about the thinking behind this track and this process. We know that projects that surface or share people's stories, and especially the stories of historically excluded communities, communities that have experienced marginalization, dispossession, oppression, those projects take time and care to prepare. And we know that for small organizations and for projects led by people from those communities, that time, that preparation time to prepare a project and an application is a really significant investment. And so through the track, Mass Humanities wants to honor that investment that applicants make in their time with our own time and application support, and a commitment to fund those projects in the track that can meet our criteria. And we will support you in meeting that criteria through the work with us and the humanities expert. Eligibility for the track, the project will need to have leadership roles for people of color or other historically excluded communities. And the organization will need to meet 2 of 4 additional criteria. So any 2 of these 4, being a small organization with an operating budget under $300,000, having 2 or fewer full-time equivalent staff, having never received a grant from Mass Humanities, and having being an organization that is based in or primarily supports the community of color. So that's 2 of those 4, plus having leadership roles for people of color or other communities historically excluded from humanities leadership could make your project eligible for that track. So if you think your project is eligible and you want to participate in the track, there are questions on that letter of inquiry form in the online application that you can answer. A committee will then review letters of inquiry and your answers to those questions, and then select applicants into that track. We're only able to select up to 15. So, if your project isn't selected for the track, if it's not eligible for the track, please still apply for an Expand Massachusetts Stories grant. We recognize that there will be projects that advance equity and also projects that expand Massachusetts stories in other ways. And we want to see those applications as well. And there are funds for those applications too. But if you have questions about the track, questions about eligibility, again, please feel free to email me. Briefly, I want to go over some of the things that this grant line can't fund. There's a more detailed list in the grant guidelines on our website, but these are sort of common things that come up that I thought would be helpful to highlight because I know you all are busy, and I wouldn't want you to start a whole process if it wouldn't fit for the application. So Expand Massachusetts Stories projects can't fund direct social service programs. Those might be programs that are for counseling, for therapeutic purposes, legal or medical services. Projects that are directly for the creation of or performance of art. So if the end result of the project is primarily a piece of art, that's not something we could fund. But as I think you saw with the El Corazon project, we can fund projects that bring people to created works of art and engage them in understanding them, engage them in the communities of artists, the people who create the art. We cannot fund projects that are specifically for lobbying or advocacy for specific public policies or legislation. And we can't fund full-length documentary films, the production stage of a full-length documentary, but we can fund short documentaries. So if your film could be completed and shared by the end of that grant period with the funds, we would welcome those applications too. If you want more information about our grants programs, as I said, there's all the information on our website. We also hosted a webinar about our full grants program a few weeks ago, and you can find it on our YouTube page. At the end of that, you'll find a section where we go over just how to get into the online application system, how to log in, how to create an account. If you scroll into like the last 20 or 30 minutes, and that's what you want to find, you'll be able to see that there. So just to return to the big questions, but I hope some of this, might have sparked some ideas. What about Worcester do people not know? And what about Worcester do you want to understand better? I hope that these questions, I hope that maybe we see some projects that help us answer these questions in the application process. And I'm gonna say thank you and also pause now and see if Erin and Nikki have any questions they think it might be helpful for me to try to answer today. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Katherine, thank you so much for this overview. And it's such an exciting time to be able to share stories.
Mm-hmm.
In particular, I have kind of a detail question.
Sure.
You note that documentaries are eligible for funding.
Mm-hmm.
What if a theater piece is documenting a history as such? Or a piece of music that's using that as the vehicle for that sharing of the stories of a community or of an individual?
Yeah, I think that there's documentary is a particular practice and process, and so its ends are not this one in the same way one might write a nonfiction book, one creates a nonfiction documentary. And so I think for a theater or another kind of performing arts organization, if independent of the final final play or production, they are creating a short documentary about the topic that's going to be featured, that could potentially be eligible, as long as it could be shared out within that grant period. But the production itself, performance in which people are inhabiting characters, creating characters, even if they're based on historical figures, that falls within the realm of art and performance. So we would see a difference there. So documentary film is a kind of a specific category that doesn't ask people to pretend to be somebody who they are not. I suppose that's maybe where you would see the difference. But a film that is documentary but connects to the topic of a performance might fit. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
I have a few questions for you as well. Can these funds be used for a contract position?
So can you say a little bit more about contract position with an organization, with an applicant, or?
For an applicant. This is a question I got in the chat.
Oh, okay, great. So if you're an organization applying and there's somebody that you want to hire to support this project, and it's a contract position, yes, you can hire that person with these funds.
Excellent. You also mentioned that one of the criteria for the Expand Mass Stories grant was having a humanities advisor. What are the criteria for that for a humanities advisor? And do you have any suggestions on how someone can go about finding one?
Yeah, so a humanities advisor is someone who is recognized for their expertise in a humanities field, which there are many humanities fields, and they're all kind of related to our reflection on who we are as humans. So some standard fields, ones that might sound very familiar, might be history or literature, philosophy, but also things like studies and art history. Lots of fields of education also fall into the humanities. And really what we're looking for is somebody who has the role of reflecting on and understanding one of those topics, one of those things that helps us understand who we are as humans, that you can't put under a microscope, right? That you can't analyze in a lab. So that could be someone with a degree from a university in one of those fields. It could also be someone who has the primary role in a community of, keeping and sharing its knowledge, right? Who's often asked to speak and have that role in the community. So we look for, in a humanities advisor, that person to demonstrate that they have that role, right? That they are asked to speak for and asked to educate people on this humanities subject in which they have expertise, or sometimes methods, so oral history interviewing or ethical interviewing. That's a practice. There's a lot that goes into doing it in a way that is, thoughtful and ethical and cares about the people whose stories are being recorded. So someone might have expertise doing that as well.
Okay, so it sounds like somebody could have documented experience like through an institution, or they could have the equivalent lived experience. And I'm sure that if anybody was unsure about whether their humanities advisor was like met the criteria, they could just
Yeah.
contact you to
Mhm.
talk through it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. Regarding the timeline, you said that letters of intent are due by April 11th. And then the full application opens in July. I'm not familiar with this kind of two-phase approach to
Mhm.
applications. So does this mean that somebody needs to apply by April 11th in order to receive the full application in July, kind of like a pre-screening of
Yeah,
qualifications?
that's a great way to think about it. It's like a pre-screening. The applications do take, a fair bit of time, and so we always want to do a little pre-screening so that you don't spend a lot of your time on an application process where it might not be a good fit. And it's also an opportunity for us to provide a little feedback where we can if we see something in the application that we say, wow, really go with this, or this particular cost within the LOI, this particular cost we wouldn't be able to fund.
Okay, so it kind of allows people to re-strategize, rethink what they're up to, but at the same time, it saves you all some time of going through projects that are completely in a different realm.
Yeah,
I like
we want to
that.
make sure that everyone tries to use their time. Everyone gets to use their time well is our aim.
I like that very much. I might take that. So Mass Humanities has a number of grant opportunities, but Worcester doesn't always get to have this one-on-one personal presentation on them. So how would you recommend that people stay in the loop on all of Mass Humanities grant opportunities?
Yeah, on our website, you can sign up for our newsletter. So if you scroll down to any page on the website, at the bottom of the pages, you'll see a little place you can put your email address in for our newsletter. And we're always announcing our grant opportunities on our newsletter. Also, if you follow us on Facebook or on Twitter, and also Instagram, where we are as frequently as we can, just reminding people of the grant deadlines and the grant opportunities.
Awesome. Well, if on social media you ever wanted to tag the Worcester Cultural Coalition, that'll get it on my phone, and then I can amplify that a little further for you.
Yeah.
Get some more money into Worcester.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a couple.
That's all the questions I had.
Great, thanks, Nikki.
I'm curious, Katherine, if I can apply for more than one grant program. So what if I'm interested in staffing as well as the engagement and storytelling?
That's a great question. So Erin's referencing another grant opportunity that we have open, which is the staffing grant opportunity. So that's a grant for past Mass Humanities grantees. So you need to have been a grantee of Mass Humanities in the past, and you can apply for funds to increase the staff at your organization that will be doing humanities programs. If you are a humanities or cultural organization. So if you want to apply for that, you cannot apply for both the staffing grant and the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant. We do have two other small grant opportunities. One is the Reading Frederick Douglass Together program, which I'm always also happy to talk about, and maybe I'll come back and talk about that. And that's a program that brings communities together to read Frederick Douglass's speech on the meaning of the 4th of July, typically, in the summer around the 4th of July. And then there's a program called the Bridge Street Sponsorships, which are for online programs by history museum centers, historical organizations in the state. So those two small grant opportunities you can apply for and apply for an Expand Massachusetts Stories grant. So those are those two small ones. Yes, you can do more than one application, but the two major grants, Expand Massachusetts Stories and staffing, you do need to choose between them. And again, that's something that's also great to reach out to us about. If you are new to Mass Humanities and haven't received a grant before, I would say that, and you have a project that aligns with the Expand Massachusetts Stories grants, I would look there because you would not be eligible for the staffing grant. And this Expand Massachusetts Stories can be a great way to get to know Mass Humanities.
Well, this is a great overview, and I had the pleasure to review the first round of applications, and it was a difficult choice because there were so many fantastic projects. And being a representative of the Worcester and Central Mass community, we want to see more of those applications. Central Mass.
I would love to see some healthy competition between different communities in our state. And love seeing applications from the Worcester community, which I think has so many amazing stories to share. Nikki, did you have a final follow-up? Yeah.
I do, yeah. Unfortunately, my attention got taken away for a moment while you were talking about the, I'm sorry, the expanding equity track. Is that what it was?
Yeah, the advancing equity track.
Advancing equity track. So that's to help people who might not have the infrastructure to be applying to grants full time, to be able to apply for a grant such as the Expand Fast Stories one. Would they be able to take advantage of that even in creating the letter of interest, or would that just be once they get past that initial phase?
You know, if you want to check in with me about the, preparing a letter of inquiry or interest, you should feel free to email me. That stage is not meant to be, like a full, here's my project plan Excel sheet. And it's a place where you say, this is the project that I want to do. Here's why I think it's important, why it fits with this grant opportunity. And as much as possible, what you think you'll need to do. So it's not meant to be a competitive process, the LOI stage. It really is that checking in to see, like, does this fit? But if you wanted to reach out ahead of time, and just because it can be, any form can feel a little bit intimidating or like a lot of work, you can reach out to us and just get a little of advice over email.
Awesome, thank you. And just from my own experience in running grants programs, I have to imagine that the sooner somebody reaches out to you, the better, because 4:50 p.m. on the day these things close, you don't really have the time to be meaningfully helping those who could use the assistance. So if they reach out today, there's even more time for them to do this work to the best of everyone's ability.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah.
Thank you, Katherine.
Well, thank you, Katherine, for sharing this information, and we will do our best to get as many Central Mass applicants in your hopper. And we're looking forward to sharing this network of storytelling and to amplify some of those events that are taking place. So appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your giving me some time here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Thank you, Katherine. You too.